is I'll do the graphic for you and Jonathan. I think that's it. So the model V of so the idea being, so Joyce, do you think you're good at all these NF functions?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense. And I got this and I thought carefully about having the names of the positions be colorful and easily understandable. And I wanted it to be easy to understand for an MBTI person. So that's why I left in dominant, auxiliary, tertiary, and inferior, and just added a little bit of color. And then, so for example, the idea of backseat driver, that like you're aware of the NE things, you just ignore it, and it's like, I try to ignore it, Ben. But sometimes I'm confronted with the NE. But I sometimes like the NE, right? Without putting words into your mouth. And then this idea that it's the modest servant. It's like and I took this thing of, now this might seem like a silly question, but because I changed the name of this column to wheelhouse, is it clear what I mean by calling it wheelhouse?
Oh, could you explain?
Well, that's the thing, because there's an expression out there called "in your wheelhouse."
Oh.
And so I was sort of thinking, like, will people understand what that means when I say that these are the wheelhouse functions?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's like when you're in this area, you feel like you're in your wheelhouse. Mm-hmm. You're in your comfort zone, your area of expertise. When you're So what about you, Jonathan? What about this name wheelhouse for this column?
Yeah, sure. It doesn't matter what. It doesn't matter what you call it. Like, no matter what names people come up with, it always leads to some level of confusion, regardless of
well, I could get extra NE. I could call this banana. I could call this apple. I could call this toffee.
Go for it.
But you know, of course. Okay, I'll ask you, Jonathan. Do you think you're good at all these NF functions?
Yes, and then he is definitely the worst. But
I'd agree with Jonathan. Yeah.
Yeah. I say my SI is better than my TE and SE, but then I just feel kind of lazy. Yeah. I like SE more than SI, but I do SI more easily than SE.
Yeah. Oh, yes, I have a theory that for you, because you are a very introverted INFJ, I have a theory that you might, I think I wrote it down here, that yeah, that was it. An extreme introvert is likely to show better use of counter-club default functions, position 5 and 7, than a moderate introvert. Conversely, a moderate introvert is likely to show better use of club situational functions, which for an introvert or extroverted than an extreme introvert. You know, in other words, a more outgoing INFJ is likely to have better FE and NE than, say, a more introverted INFJ. And a more introverted INFJ is more likely to have better TI and SI because they're in that state of introversion more often.
Yeah. Also, I should say I've been raised. My parents are both ISJs, so that may have impacted my SI as well. Yeah, I do find like overly detailed stories with a lot of SI to be a bit much. I don't mind them in doses. Well, I'd say I like something like John Grisham, who I think is in like an STJ, maybe an ESTJ, whatever. I like his stuff more than George R. R. Martin, who's also SI type. Could be INFP or ISTJ, one or the other. But the difference is George R. R. Martin's books, they're part of a long series. So you have to like read the whole thing and you get so much SI and he gets more and more SI as he goes on. Whereas like a John Grisham book is like more episodic. So it's like just read it, story's done, you can just put it down.
So Jonathan, have you done that test that I've suggested? Like asking
Yeah,
Guardians what to think of do they love the sensory description?
I have not done that test. No,
Oh,
I'll take your word for it.
yeah,
Then again, I've only read one John Grisham book, so I don't know what I'm talking about.
right.
I've read a couple of Tom Clancy, he's ESTJs, probably. So I'm just throwing out names now.
So, what do you think? What do you think of the idea of like dividing it in terms of your default realm of operation? And I had sort of like different names for this, like default field of consciousness, default realm of operation. Like, so if does that make sense? Is that understandable?
It makes sense.
Right.
It's very NE of you to see what parts make sense and don't while you're talking to us and trying to figure it out there. Yeah.
Because I want people to understand Vertness properly, like as in like how Jung originally meant it to be understood, except using better words. like you know what I mean. Don't use the word objective. Use the word empirical. And so, for example, here it's subjective. It's internal, and then even with SI is not as internal as the other introverted functions. However, certain subfunctions of SI, like the imaginative part, like for instance, when Guardians are reading those George R.R. Martin novels, and when they are imagining what is described, their own sort of subjective flavor, the things that they've already experienced, really colours how they experience it. And I suppose the only way to sort of get towards that would be to have some Guardians discuss what they got out of each of the descriptions, to sort of like get an idea into what their sensory imagination's like. And I would also say the internal bodily harmony, again, internal. But I also think the other ones are internally focused as well. Because it's sensing, generally you are sensing things outside of yourself. It's got a subjective filter on it, but it's still outside of yourself. But so that's why I wanted to put that note in there. And do you think it's fair to say for the introverted type, the default realm of operation is introverted, meaning that the subjective reaction to the stimulus is more important than the stimulus itself?
Fascinating. What are your thoughts, Jonathan?
See, I have. Bear in mind, I've been doing this with Ben for years, so I'm just used to. So I was busy, answering comments, so I didn't hear that.
I'll ask it on her behalf then, Jonathan. What do you think, Jonathan, about all this Vertness stuff? Does it make sense?
It probably does, yes.
Oh, it probably does. Oh, this is the big J himself. Like, where is he going wrong?
Interesting number of those everyone's actually introverted thinks, feels, and acts in the way that's good else. He's going wrong because he's just speaking in INTP's talk.
So, do you think that Carl Jung did a good job of writing a book that looked like it was written by an INTP?
Evidently,
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And also, I see it as dynamic as well. So, and I give an example of Vanderhoop. I quote Vanderhoop. I can actually quote Vanderhoop because he died in 1950, so that means 70 years since he died. So he's out of copyright. Vanderhoop, because Tick, the Imperator Knight, the historian guy, he mentioned George Orwell, and he died in about 1950-51, didn't he, Jonathan? And so he's because he wanted to know if something from George Orwell was out of copyright.
Unless it's Disney or something, yeah. If it's Disney, then it doesn't matter.
Yeah, but they did extend that. Yeah, they got that extension. I saw some videos on that. But Mickey Mouse, though, in a year or two, the original Mickey Mouse, without that comes in open, and in about the next 10 or 15 years, Batman and Superman become available.
Well, supposedly they'll come available.
Yeah.
we'll see what the studios have to say with that.
Yeah. So Vanderhook wrote about. He said he took up riding a horse. I've got the full quote. I'll give you the full quote from Vanderhook when he talks about riding a horse again, and he talks about different. He did it whilst he was investigating this book. And what page is it? Page 24. And he writes about how different states would be of varying uses. So at this time, here we go. At the time when I was investigating the instinctive sphere, I took up riding again after a long interval. And it taught me a lot about a state of mind in which more complicated mental activity must be cut out. If I had begun to think too much about it, I should certainly have been in danger of being thrown. If I had given way to feeling, I should have perhaps become anxious or too self-confident, which would have been no more helpful, nor would intuition have got me very far. Yet I was conscious of being intensely active, my attention being riveted on the totality of my sense experience and my reactions to it. This mental activity, bound up as it unquestionably is with emotion, is very difficult to describe. So that would be an example of, you've got an introvert like Vanderhook, situationally extroverting because the situation calls for it. And so that's why I got this idea that introvert situationally extrovert and extrovert situationally introvert. Usually I would say when they reflect on something. And I've given some examples on, but I wasn't able to add it to the graphic. Not enough space to add it. So yeah, I mean, I want people to understand Vertness. If they understand Vertness, then that helps some people to understand the functions. Like, say the difference between FE and FI. And see, it's like, because then it's like, I think it helps people get to an understanding of the functions that is closer to Jung. The only difference is with like our present definitions of SE and SI go beyond what can be deduced from a concept of, say, so for example, if you were to teach somebody, if you were taught to somebody and they understood the concept of sensing, and then you were to teach them and they understood the concept of extroverting and introverting, and then you were to ask them, well, what does SE and SI mean? They would actually end up with an answer that's different from our present understanding, because our definition of SE is not just empirical sensing. It's not just like, say, a high sensory acuity to the actual physical properties of objects and sounds. It's more than that, because we went through that earlier on. There's things that have come in from the temperament, and that's why Vanderhook said there's an instinct going on here. So where was that? Oh, it's up here somewhere. Right, here we go.